Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Manhattan Institute President Reihan Salam.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the 22nd Annual Alexander Hamilton Awards Ceremony. One of the reasons we at the Manhattan Institute celebrate Alexander Hamilton is that he was both a man of ideas, subtle, profound, powerful ideas, and a man of action, who built and led great institutions while laying the intellectual foundation for America's unprecedented economic rise. And so it's fitting that tonight we are honoring Paul Gigot and Ken Griffin, both of whom reflect this Hamiltonian spirit. Paul and Ken have been tireless in their efforts to advance economic opportunity, individual liberty, and the rule of law in America and its great cities, a commitment that is at the heart of everything we do at MI. Everyone in this room understands that we find ourselves at a fraught moment in our nation's civic life. The foundations of our freedom are coming under attack. Those who dare to defend our constitutional order find themselves subject to intimidation and harassment, if not worse. MI exists to ensure that those who attempt to shout down these essential voices will not carry the day. And none of our work would be possible without the generosity of our supporters, including our outstanding trustees, many of whom I'm happy to report are here with us tonight. I am especially pleased this evening to announce that one of our distinguished MI trustees, John Paulson, whom we honored at last year's Hamilton Awards ceremony, has made an extraordinary commitment of $10 million to the Institute and its mission. John, please stand and be recognized. I'd be so grateful. Thank you, John, for your vision, your courage, and your generosity. With John's transformative gift, we are poised to dramatically increase our impact in the public square and among policymakers across the country. We are establishing the new Paulson Media Center, where we'll produce new podcasts and video content that will allow us to further expand our growing audience. And John's gift will also allow us to recruit a new generation of courageous and creative thinkers who I'm proud to say will be known as the Paulson Fellows. I am so grateful to John for this incredible gift and for all the ways his generosity and partnership will allow us to turn intellect into influence. I would also like to recognize our platinum sponsors who've done so much to make this evening a success. Laurel and Cliff Asness, Anne and Tom Charters, CRC Advisors, Ravenel Curry, Timothy G. Dalton Jr. and Julie Dalton, Marilyn and Michael Fedak, Jay Frankie and David Harrow, Michael Kaufman, Daniel Loeb, Paula and Tom McInerney, Rupert Murdoch, News Corp, the O'Neill Family Foundation, John Paulson, Charles Schwab, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas W. Smith, and Warren Stevens. With your steadfast support and friendship, MI is working hard to meet the most urgent challenges of our time, from the crisis of violence in New York and in cities across the country, to the reckless fiscal and monetary policies that have sparked rates of inflation not seen in decades, to the rise of cancel culture and the threat it represents to open inquiry and civil discourse. MI scholars and journalists are at the forefront of these debates. We are exposing the many failures of the status quo and offering pragmatic, impactful policy solutions that will help renew the promise of American life. And finally, I'm honored to introduce the chairman of the MI Board of Trustees, Paul Singer. In addition to being one of the world's most admired investors in financial markets, Paul has been a far-sighted investor in the institutions and values that undergird free societies at home and abroad. His thoughtful and principled leadership and friendship has been central to the Institute's success. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our chairman, Paul Singer.
Thank you, Reihan. Good evening and welcome. My job tonight is to warm up the audience. I think it's going to be a challenge, but I'm going to try. But it's a good evening because we've raised over $3 million tonight, which is, thank you. That's the best ever Hamilton Hall. And many thanks to our donors and for your generosity. I'm not going to rename the donors. And thanks again to John Paulson for his truly transformative gift. At last year's dinner, the city's mayor was a socialist Red Sox fan. And the governor had just resigned in disgrace. This year, the mayor is a vegan Mets fan, and the lieutenant governor has just resigned in disgrace. This is not progress. When my generation was having babies, we played music to them in utero. Beethoven and the collected speeches of Winston Churchill. It was thought to have imprinted in them culture, refinement, and the emanations for the classic part of Western civilization. Who would have known that just a generation later, that same impulse to get to impressionable minds early would lead today's educated class to play to babies in utero the collected works of super woke leaders Ibram X. Kendi and Robin DiAngelo. I got to work on that one. It's amazing that the lessons of the cultural slide from the 1960s to the 1990s need to be revisited and relearned today. Crime, the demotivating impact of welfare, the destruction caused by chasing away achievers and job providers rather than figuring out how to create an attractive environment for people all across the economic spectrum. MI fought some of the same battles in the dark pre-Rudy days, but it is much worse today, much more dangerous, the levels of government so infused with ideologically rigid idiocies. I really don't understand how the greatest city in the world got to be so one-sided politically. But actually, this creates inefficiency. The entire right-of-center population of the greatest city in the world is right here tonight. In this room, and I have all of your emails. Most of us in this room may be well over the draft age for this battle. We may not be able to roam the battlefield with the same agility of the 1960s and 1970s. We might not even fit into the battle outfits of that hopeful period. But what we have on our side is common sense and the inheritance of the framers of the institutions and values that have made America a beacon of freedom and hope, a magnet for people seeking freedom and opportunity from all over the world. In this battle, we're aided in two big ways. One way is that we're actually right. America is worthy and unique, and we have the right solutions. Two, Two was that the opponents of freedom, the adherents of today's version of Mao's Little Red Book, just can't help themselves. They're out of touch with reality. While they obsess over the alleged evils of capitalism and their ever-expanding list of grievances, the level of violent crime in cities across America reaches new heights, and public school systems are failing children across the country, especially the kids who are most in need of a decent education. MI scholars have been way ahead of the curve. MI scholars have been way ahead of the curve in identifying these problems and devising actionable solutions. In City Journal and other media outlets, and in briefings with lawmakers from both parties and at all levels of government, the unmatched team of MI continues to drive the national debate. It's no surprise that the demand for our scholars' expertise is higher than ever, as the boneheaded decisions of policymakers across the globe come home to roost. But under the energetic and brilliant leadership of Reihan Salam and Ilana Golant, MI and our supporters here tonight have dusted off the playbook for saving civil society, freedom, and the meritocracy. And we are certainly up for the struggle. MI has not lost a step in the ability to push back eloquently, intelligently, and passionately against bad ideas and bad people. We have our wonderful friends, donors, who have been with us through the wars for the soul of New York City and cities across America. And we have new friends, including refugees from the left. Today's version of huddled masses yearning to breathe free in the framing of Emma Lazarus. As you know, at the Hamilton dinner, we honor Americans who are active in public life and use their station to promote freedom. It would not be an overstatement to say that Ken Griffin is one of the sharpest and most innovative investors in the history of financial markets. But his influence ranges far beyond his business skills. Armed with the courage of his convictions, Ken has become a leader in a range of conservative causes around the country. In his home city of Chicago, Ken matches a clear and crisp articulation of urban decay with the generosity and ingenuity needed to arrest its decline. Ken loves this country and puts his money where his mouth is. Our next Hamilton Award recipient, Paul Gigot, runs the indispensable editorial page of our time. To make this personal, when I read Paul's page, I can tell there's an adult in charge. Since taking over the page in 2001, Paul has suffused the section with wisdom and humor. Paul doesn't simply comment on the issues of the day from behind the comfort of the keyboard. He reports out each editorial, talking sometimes to dozens of officials, policymakers, experts, and others in formulating the paper's institutional views. In doing so, he sets a standard for journalistic practice at a moment so desperately in need of it. Tonight, we honor him for his courageous commitment to the cause of free people and free markets. This year truly has been a year of outstanding achievements at MI. In Reihan's words, the Institute pursues, quote, a more practical, results-oriented approach that focuses on core quality of life questions, a belief in the potential of urban life, an unapologetic defense of educational excellence and public order, and a healthy skepticism towards centralized power. I hope you'll join me this year in supporting this critical mission. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Manhattan Institute Executive Vice President Ilana Golant.
Good evening. As you just saw, all of us at MI are working hard to develop solutions for our cities, schools, and country. It's a unique privilege to work with a team of such creative and dedicated scholars and journalists. I'd like to acknowledge tonight all of the MI scholars and staff who have joined us. MI punches well above its size in terms of the quality of our scholarship and our impact, and it is because we have a uniquely dedicated, talented, and creative team. Could our scholars and staff please stand and be recognized? Thank you. They have all done so much to make tonight a success and to advance the work of the Institute. For those of you interested in supporting MI's work, you'll find donation cards that you can place in the boxes on your table, which our team members will collect at the end of the evening. Your support has a real impact and is deeply appreciated. Before we begin dinner, I wanted to note that we're joined this evening by members of the NYPD, including Commissioner Sewell, and former Commissioners Shea and Kelly. At MI, we are proud of our legacy of pragmatic solutions to ensure public safety in our city and of our long-standing relationship with the NYPD. I want to thank the Commissioner, her predecessors, and all of their colleagues for joining us this evening and for all they do to keep New York safe. And thank you again for your generosity in making our work possible. On that note, please enjoy your dinner. Our program will resume at 8:30 with remarks from tonight's honorees. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Cliff Asness, founder, managing principal, and chief investment officer at AQR Capital Management.
Good evening, everyone. I am deeply honored to introduce our first award winner of the evening, Wall Street Journal editorial page editor for 20 years, Paul Gigot. Let me first give you the very short version. Where the hell would we be without the Wall Street Journal editorial page? Where the hell would the Wall Street Journal editorial page be without Paul Gigot? And let me answer my question. We'd be totally screwed, full stop. Now you get the long version. To start, I am actually quite thrilled that I did not have to submit these remarks to Paul and his team. Let me tell you how that would have gone. I would have sent a draft to what I thought was the submissions email. I gave a hint there. I then would have waited about a week, not heard. Finally, I'd email Paul, little snippy, maybe mentioning that he's published 9 of my op-eds over 12 years. And don't I merit a response? Paul would respond, Cliff, you sent it to the wrong email. Again, we'll run it next week. I would then be embarrassed and quite excited, which is an emotional combination I have personally mastered. I'm not quite done. Finally, you get from Paul's team, I assume, it could be Paul, it's very Sphinx-like there, you don't exactly know. I would get a much shorter version of what I wrote. I don't think Paul will be shocked to hear that I would hate this much shorter version very, very much. They'd also give you about an hour to edit it and either approve or it's not going to run, and they would accept some suggestions back. They're okay with that. But at the end of the hour, And I'm not just sucking up here. Well, I am sucking up, but it's true. I would discover that their version was just better than mine. They actually know what they're doing. I'm damn lucky there's a place for views like mine, and that Paul and his team are so good at what they do, they can fool the world into thinking I can write. As you may have guessed, this is not a hypothetical example. Unfortunately for you, Paul has not been able to edit this. This is the unedited version. The Wall Street Journal editorial page is a singular outpost among media giants, and it's singular in a very important way. It is not deranged. Now, hear me out. It's a bit better than not deranged. I would use words brilliant, honest, even courageous. But not deranged is actually a pretty high bar these days, considering I can think of one example that crosses it. It's wonderful to be talking about Paul at the Manhattan Institute. The Journal has been a wonderful outlet for MI scholars over time. People like Jason Riley, Heather McDonald, Raphael Mangual, Charles Lehman. There are other examples. I had to cut it. If I left you out, yell at Paul. He should have published more of your work. It's not an accident that MI scholars find the Wall Street Journal a natural home. We're at a time when so many of the nation's biggest newspapers have gone off the deep end. They are driven by youthful staff suffering the dual diseases of wokeness and lack of a good Econ 101 teacher. Thankfully, and my friend Paul Singer listed some of these too, like the Manhattan Institute, the Wall Street Journal can be trusted to stand up for things like the efficacy and, yes, fairness of free markets, the importance of public safety, rational fiscal and monetary policy, sane energy policy, and of course much more. We, and I mean the Manhattan Institute, the Wall Street Journal, and I hope and expect and believe most of this room, believe these things because they bring prosperity to the many and because they're respectful of the rights of the few. And we know that those two things don't go together by accident. I was pausing for applause there, so that worked. Let me actually talk about Paul a bit, though all the wonderful things about the Wall Street Journal are implicitly about Paul. Paul actually had a life, and a rather accomplished one, before his current gig. He grew up in Wisconsin. Actually, that's not particularly accomplished. It's nice, but went to college at Dartmouth. It's picking up. He joined the Journal as a reporter in 1980. I got bar mitzvahed in 1980. And I've been around a while. In that decade, he went on to cover Asia, winning an Overseas Press Club award in the process of writing on the Philippines and to serve as a White House fellow under Ronald Reagan. He then started writing his famous Potomac Watch column, giving an insider's look at DC, and his face became a familiar sight on television in the 1990s, particularly I think in the Jim Lehrer show. So if you have a vague kind of memory of seeing Paul, that may be where it's from. In other words, Paul did quite a few things that a lot of journalists don't do today. He spent time actually covering the world and learning things about it, and then only with that kind of base of knowledge and skills did he turn to commentary and opinion. This is novel stuff, I know, and his method may be just a tad superior to journalists who focus mostly on growing Twitter followers and occasionally doxing their enemies. Of course, Paul has been fantastically successful at all of this, and I will pick one random example. In 2000, he won a Pulitzer Prize for Potomac Watch. Now, Paul, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe in your line of work, that's a big deal. I could be. Not as good as this. Today, despite his duties overseeing the writing of others, you can still hear him hosting a podcast version of Potomac Watch, and you can still see him on the Journal editorial report, an hour-long show weekly on Fox News. Paul Gigot is simply a giant astride the world of journalism and a warrior for things that the people in this room believe in. So it is yet again my tremendous honor to present Paul Gigot with the Manhattan Institute's 2022 Alexander Hamilton Award. Congratulations, Paul.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Cliff. I think not demented is the nicest thing anybody's ever said about me. I don't know how many of you read Cliff's Twitter feed, but I recommend it because I learn more about finance from his Twitter feed than I do from most of the financial press. It's great to see so many friends here, especially after the long COVID winter. And as a journalist, I have to say it's especially good to see so many sources. You know who you are, and I will not rat you out. So this isn't always the reception I receive, not universal. At an event a few years back, a young man came up to me, he was at roughly college age, and said, "Wow, it's great to meet you. I'm a big fan. Read your stuff, see you on TV," and so on. And so I was feeling pretty good about myself. We chatted for a couple of minutes. And then the young man said, "Well, I got to go, but this is a real thrill. Now I can tell everyone that I have finally met Chris Matthews." That's a true story, and I'd say it's mildly humiliating. I want to thank Paul Singer, Reihan Salam, and MI for this. I appreciate it very much. The MI and the Journal have had a long and happy collaboration, as Cliff said. We both published the great Jason Riley. As well as so many other scholars. And what we find, I think, valuable about their contributions is that they're not afraid. First of all, they know their stuff. Second, they are not afraid to challenge the conventional wisdom. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about tonight. I was thinking about what to say here, and Alexander Hamilton and all that. And it occurred to me that Alexander Hamilton, among many other things, was a newspaper man. He founded the New York Post. It's only my second favorite newspaper. He was also a pamphleteer, I guess what you'd call today an opinion writer. He was engaged in the debates of his time and wasn't cowed by fashionable opinion. I wonder what he'd think about our era, which too often resembles an age of conformity. Never in history have there been more outlets, more ways for people to tell the world what they think, and never in history have so many people wanted to all think alike. And not only that, insist that you think like they think. And if you refuse, you can be silenced or ostracized or fired. It's happened. Now, this is destructive for democracy, obviously for innovation and science and medicine, competition and business, but I think it's especially destructive for journalism. If any institution has a stake in fighting conformity, you'd think it would be the press. Conformity is what authoritarians try to impose on the press. Now, American journalists, when I was coming of age, when I was growing up in the business, as Cliff said many centuries ago, American journalists used to fight back against censorship. Today, many say freedom of speech is simply too free. They support censorship on tech platforms. They denounce Elon Musk because he wants to buy Twitter actually to promote free speech. Go figure. They even support what the Biden administration is calling its new Disinformation Governance Board. All I can say is, I guess they don't read George Orwell at the White House. Sometimes I think I've fallen asleep like a reverse Rip Van Winkle and awakened in Singapore in the 1980s. That's when Melanie Kirkpatrick and we were in Asia for the Journal. Melanie's here. We were hauled into court because Melanie wrote an editorial criticizing the arrest of the only two opposition members of Parliament. Now, today, that same censoring impulse, I hate to say it, is here in the United States, and it's in the press corps. Now, tell you a story. No doubt all of you recall the mood after George Floyd's murder, which really was a terrible case of police abuse and was properly punished. But the dominant media opinion soon turned, after that terrible day, turned into an attack on policing in general and on the anti-crime policies that did so much for so long in this city and elsewhere to make the streets safer and life safer and to reduce crime. Now, naturally, this did not sit well with Heather McDonald, as all of you know. I think it's safe to say she's fearless, and she sent us an article not too long after the George Floyd's murder, arguing that when you, of course, attack law enforcement, particularly all of law enforcement in general vague terms, police tend to retreat from their duties. Crime makes a comeback. Well, we decided we'll publish Heather's piece. And the reaction was furious. She was denounced far and wide, and we were asked to apologize. Have we met? Some reporters used that, Heather's piece, as Exhibit A in a case for why the Wall Street Journal editorial page should be canceled. They didn't succeed, I'm happy to say. But 2 years later, what have we learned? We learned Heather was right. The surge in murder, the surge in crime has happened almost precisely as she predicted it would. Now, my point here isn't to claim vindication, though Heather deserves it. The point is that conformity is destructive because it silences voices and ideas that need to be heard in a democracy. If more people had listened to Heather at the time, we would have avoided the last 2 years and perhaps avoided the surge in crime and the mistakes of the past. For the press, a stifling consensus is also the enemy of credibility. My mentor at the Journal, Bob Bartley, liked to tell the story about the great Johnstown, Pennsylvania flood of 1889, which killed 2,200 people. That was the era of telegraphic reports, and legend has it that a reporter on the scene wired back a story with the lead, "God looked out on Johnstown today and wept." To which his editor wired back, "Forget flood, interview God." Now, the lesson of that story, what Bob wanted us to learn, is that journalists have to be open to what they see for themselves. Be alert for news. Don't merely accept what everyone tells you is true. Look for yourself, see the world plain, and tell your audience about it, even if it might be unpopular. By the way, this is as true for those of us who have the luxury of admitting we have opinions as it is for reporters who like to pretend that they do not have opinions. I'm convinced that conformity is one reason for the decline of public trust in the press. Some of you may have read that President Biden, speaking at the White House Correspondents' Dinner this past weekend, said that he was delighted to address a group that had a lower approval rating than he has. Good line. But it's actually worse than that. The press has a lower approval rating even than Congress. It's down to friends and family, I'm afraid, and we've earned it. We've earned it. Now, the only way to regain public trust is to return to doing our proper job. Stop sitting on stories like Hunter Biden's laptop. Which, by the way, I have to praise the New York Post for this. I mean, they really did a fabulous job. For my sins, I was on the Pulitzer Prize board for 9 years, and I would have voted for the Post for that. The way to regain public trust is to start telling the truth without worrying whether the blue check marks on Twitter approve. Now, I know I'm not here today because of who I am, but I'm here because I represent the Journal, an institution that has supported the principles on our editorial page for many decades. And I'm really grateful and proud that our proprietors have always supported us when we get into a little trouble, create some controversy, whether that be with the White House, a foreign government, or other members of the press. Institutions like the Manhattan Institute and the Journal are vital because they sustain and pass down principles and standards to the next generation. And at the Journal, as Cliff suggested, that tradition includes free markets and free people. And I dare say we need that more than ever today, when those ideas are out of fashion and under attack, not just by the left, but also by many on the right. You know, American politics is in many ways an eternal battle between equality and freedom, twin poles of Western thought. Both have legitimate claims, and sometimes we need to tilt towards equality, as we did during the era of Jim Crow, to break Jim Crow. At the Journal, we lean toward freedom first, and we do so because we think that those who strive to protect freedom do better by equality than those who emphasize equality do by freedom. The last decade and a half haven't been terrific, as we all know, for those of us who believe in economic freedom. The financial crisis, the Great Recession soured millions of people on capitalism. Socialism made a comeback. The era of big government returned. But if you'll allow me to hazard a prediction, I sense that a turn is coming. The policies of those who believe in the primacy of the state simply haven't worked. The problems that an earlier generation worked so hard to defeat are back. Inflation, shortages, crime, social division, dictators on the march. The coercion that marked the pandemic has reminded Americans about the excesses and failures of government. Now, as Cliff suggested, I'm old enough to be an optimist because I've seen this before. As I began my professional life in the late 1970s, the United States was facing problems that are uncannily similar to the ones we face today. But thanks to the work and the ideas of the Manhattan Institute, to Bob Bartley and the Journal and many others, America found solutions. And we can do it again. We will do it again. if I can adapt a phrase that Barack Obama once used in a different context, the 1980s called. They want their policies back. I once lamented to former Secretary of State George Shultz that all the bad ideas we thought we had defeated in the 1980s seem to have returned. George said basically, cheer up, kid. And he reminded me that in human affairs, there are no permanent victories and there are no permanent defeats. Each of us, each generation has to fight to preserve and regain the freedom in the era in which we live. And that's the great privilege that the owners and readers of the Journal and all of you here allow me and my colleagues every day. And as for our friends on the left who want us to go away, sorry to disappoint. We aren't going anywhere. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Niall Ferguson, best-selling historian and Milbank Family Senior Fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford.
Ladies and gentlemen, long before he'd become a character in a rap musical by a composer who nearly got cancelled for being insufficiently woke, Alexander Hamilton was described by his wife Eliza as having a character perhaps too frank and independent for a democratic people. The United States, that's not an applause line. Except for the undemocratic people. The United States has at its core a paradox. It has a strongly egalitarian streak, hence the persistent aversion of Americans to monarchy and aristocracy, things to which Alexander Hamilton, though his origins were lowly, was undoubtedly attracted. Yet because of America's fundamental commitment to the idea of individual liberty, there is no place in the world where a man of exceptional ability stands a better chance of making his fortune and his mark. Those like Hamilton who achieve great things with the opportunities America presents are not universally loved. Indeed, they often come under vituperative attack, despite the immense contributions they make economically, politically, and philanthropically. It's fitting, therefore, that tonight the Manhattan Institute is bestowing a Hamilton Award on my friend Ken Griffin. Now, I don't want to overdo the comparison with Hamilton for obvious reasons. I'm pretty confident Ken won't be challenging anyone to a duel, for example. Okay, I'm slightly confident. Ken is also, of course, a great deal more, vastly more financially successful than Hamilton was. Now, just why has Ken Griffin been so astonishingly successful? Now, there are obvious answers to this question which you can read about in the many profiles that have been written about him. The fierce intelligence, the competitive drive, the strategic vision. But I have a different perspective. And it goes back to my first meeting with Ken many years ago. We think it was in 2004. I couldn't help noticing that night he seemed ill at ease, especially with the people immediately around him. I asked him earlier today if he remembered that first meeting, and I'm glad to say that he did. Yes, Neil, he said, that was the night you told me the lesson of history is that only ruthless men build successful financial businesses. In particular, I asked Ken if he'd read Machiavelli's The Prince. Having been to Harvard rather than Oxford, he hadn't. Well, the next time I saw him was in this city about a year later. And he was a changed man. He was smiling, relaxed, transformed. And I had to ask, what had changed? It's simple, he said. I took your advice. I read The Prince. And then I fired half my management team. I still feel a bit of remorse about that. The key passage in The Prince, Ken later told me, is actually chapter 6 of new principalities that are acquired through one's own arms and virtue. Let me quote the passage in question from Harvey Mansfield's excellent edition. Those who become princes by the paths of virtue acquire their principality with difficulty, but hold it with ease. And the difficulties they have in acquiring their principality arise in part from the new orders and modes that they are forced to introduce so as to found their state and their security. And it should be considered that nothing is more difficult to handle, more doubtful of success, nor more dangerous to manage than to put oneself at the head of introducing new orders. For, Machiavelli says, the introducer has all those who benefit from the old orders as enemies, and he has lukewarm defenders in all those who might benefit from the new orders. This lukewarmness arises partly from fear of adversaries who have the laws on their side, and partly from the incredulity of men who do not truly believe in new things unless they come to have a firm experience of them. Consequently, whenever those who are enemies have opportunity to attack, they do so with partisan zeal, and the others defend lukewarmly, so that one is in peril along with them. I think that brilliant passage sums up both the way Ken has built Citadel and Citadel Securities, and the opposition that he's often encountered in the process. And it's been the same when he's engaged politically and philanthropically. He told me earlier today that the non-business achievement of which he's most proud is the role he played with the last administration in getting Operation Warp Speed to happen, the one extraordinary triumph of the annus horribilis of 2020. But you'll remember, not everybody was an enthusiastic supporter of Operation Warp Speed at the time. There were even those who cast aspersions on the vaccines before their astonishing efficacy was proved, mentioning no names Kamala Harris. The immense amount that Ken has spent in trying to improve K-12 education has had all kinds of positive results for kids in deprived neighborhoods in Chicago and Miami and elsewhere. But perhaps the most newsworthy aspect has been the noisy protests by teachers' unions outside his apartment. You know you're above the target when that kind of flack is incoming. I asked Ken recently which author had influenced him as a young man, the pre-Machiavelli Griffin. And his answer surprised me. No, not Ayn Rand, whom, as he said, people often come to admire only after they're successful. No, he picked John Rawls's theory of justice. In one of his most famous arguments, Rawls says, we need to imagine ourselves in a situation before any particular society exists. Rawls calls this situation the original position. The idea is, if we want to design a just society, we have to put ourselves behind a veil of ignorance, not knowing what our own talents or lack of talents may be. This brings me to a story about Ken's family, which I want to share with you. The most influential man in Ken Griffin's life, I learned today, was a man he never met, the grandfather who died before he was born. Let me tell you about Wayne Gratz, Ken's grandfather. He was a small-town, Midwestern, self-made, hard-scrabble entrepreneur. He ran a gas station, and he acquired, in time, car dealerships. When he was a young man, the rich guy in town said, "If you marry my daughter, I'll send you to Northwestern." Wayne said no, and he didn't go to college. He and his wife, Ken's granny, who outlived Wayne, were poor in the Depression. They accumulated their first nest egg literally by selling eggs. What Ken Griffin has achieved, I think, would have made Wayne Gratz proud if he'd lived to see only the first 5 years of Citadel. And I think it would also impress very much a man who not only shared, but in many ways created his vision of an America based on free market capitalism, equality of opportunity, and individual freedom to compete, but also on public schools and public health that serve the public and not vested interests, whether teachers' unions or hereditary elites. The visionary I'm talking about was, of course, Alexander Hamilton, the recipient, the deserved recipient of our award tonight is Ken Griffin.
So I wrote in my notes, "Thank you, Neil, for the very kind introduction." I will say that's the most extraordinarily unique introduction I've ever been given in my life. And yes, my grandfather really was my inspiration as a young man. He and my grandmother grew up in the Midwest. They grew up dirt poor. My grandmother had no running water. And the business they started, the proceeds from selling eggs, turned into a successful small town business in the northern suburbs of Chicago, which is where I came to call home when I graduated from college in 1989. I was attracted to Chicago to work with a man who I thought was just extraordinary, who I thought would help me to build a business, and he supported me in launching Citadel. And Chicago at the time was one of the great financial centers, not only of the United States, but of the world. Futures exchanges were developed in Chicago, a very, very robust capital market center for the world. And the city, vibrant, full of life. We built an incredible number of skyscrapers in the early years that I was there, rapidly expanding, beautiful streets, great restaurants, a place you could call home. A place that my partners and I recruited thousands of people to move to from across the country. And we were really proud of Chicago. We were proud of the place that we called home. Now, unfortunately, over the last several years, growing our business in Chicago has become extraordinarily difficult. I see my friends, fellow business leaders, leaving our state. In fact, today, Illinois has one of the greatest levels of outward migration of any state in America. Why are people fleeing the land of Lincoln? There are three reasons. The senseless violence that grips our streets, the adverse impact of corruption, and schools that are simply not preparing our children for the present, let alone the future. Now, I know that every person in this room is familiar with the crime pandemic that grips the city that I call home. Last year, there was a shootout between gang members. Open warfare in the middle of the day. 70 shots fired, a man left dead. The police, to their credit, arrested everybody. And the state's attorney general charged no one. You see, these men engaged in consensual mutual combat and therefore would not be prosecuted under the wisdom of our great state attorney general. Now, what happens when there are no consequences for criminal acts? You might say that's an awful story, but probably didn't happen in the neighborhood where Ken and his colleagues live. No, where my colleagues and I live, I've had roughly 4 colleagues robbed at gunpoint in the last year and a half. I had a colleague stabbed hundreds of feet away from the office coming to work in the morning. I had a colleague experience a bullet fly through the window of his car blocks away from the office. You see, when crime reaches the level that you can't walk on your streets at night, you can't let your kids play in the park, and you don't feel safe even going to a restaurant without the fear of your car being carjacked, your city loses its energy, it loses its life. Now, what's regrettable is it's not just crime that plagues Illinois, it's corruption. That is the second weight that all of us as taxpayers carry on our shoulders. Corruption so extraordinary that our last Speaker of the House has been recently indicted for racketeering. 4 of our last 10 governors spent time in prison after their public service to the state of Illinois. And regretfully, the story doesn't get better when it comes to education. Chicago public school students have one of the shortest school days and one of the shortest school years of any city in America. In a city plagued by challenging demographics, children who are often born in a book with in a house with not one book. Former Mayor Rahm Emanuel, who worked so tirelessly as mayor of our city, took on the teachers union for a longer school year, longer school day to help our children, and experienced the stiff arm of the union in a teacher strike as the teachers put their self-interest in front of the kids whom they supposedly serve. And so against this backdrop, you can understand why people are leaving Chicago. Now, over the last 15 years, we've seen this abyss grow before our eyes. The reckless spending, the loss of leadership, and we made a conscious decision to change our global footprint at Citadel. We made a decision that Chicago could not be our only home as our business. To get right to the point, today, New York City is by far our single largest office in the world. And I will share with you that we've had our concerns about New York over the last 8 years. But I would say that the important contributions of the Manhattan Institute over this time on critical issues that define long-term economic stability and growth, on public safety, have helped to drive a forward-looking vision in this city. And I am pleased that Mayor Adams has successfully run on an agenda that also focuses on these areas. And I wish him and all of New York success in changing the trajectory of this city. And it is an honor to be here tonight as the recipient of this recognition. But I want to say that I am so thankful that the Manhattan Institute will continue to serve as a valuable voice on important policy issues, not just for New York, but also our entire nation. And I'd like to thank Reihan and everyone at MI for their incredibly important work and thought leadership. Thank you so very much.
Thank you all for coming and supporting our work. And thank you and congratulations to our honorees, Paul Gigot and Ken Griffin, for giving us an opportunity to celebrate their prodigious accomplishments, and to Cliff Asness and Niall Ferguson for their kind introductions. I'd like to thank all of my colleagues in our development team for their hard work and dedication. Andrew Law, Emily Vanderland, Saga Lislow, Paul Shakeshaft, and Susanna Ragusa. And thank you to our events team and everyone else who worked so tirelessly to make this such a special night in the life of the Institute, especially Ilana Golant, Michelle Jacob, Kayla Lewis, Jessica Begetta, Aaron Ricks, and Ben Burney. The bar will stay open until 10:30 p.m., and you're very welcome to stay with us until then.